After the flop of the Virtual Boy and its lesser-known counterparts, it took the VR industry more than 15 years to fully recover and carry on. Sure, there have been attempts to spruce up the industry, like head-mounted displays and motion controllers, and we'll talk about that today as well. But even if you're not familiar with the device from the title of the video, you probably remember the hype around virtual reality in the early 2010s. Anyway, today we have the Oculus Rift and the VR Renaissance. Throw away your eye drops, you won't need them in this episode. And we're away! Last time we left off at the end of the 90s, when most developers decided that virtual reality was lame and the technology wasn't ready yet. With this thought, they entered the 21st century, seemingly having given up on the VR. There wasn't anything particularly interesting here, except for some isolated attempts to make a display in a helmet form factor. One of those is the Imagine Z800 3D visor from 2005. In a nutshell, it's a display rather than VR goggles or a helmet, but it utilized the developments of both. For example, Z800 could display 2- and 3-dimensional videos, and used a system that tracks the user's head movements for interaction with the computer interface. Yet the user was tied to the computer with a USB cable, so there was no freedom of movement. At the same time, motion controllers were developing. Like their modern counterparts, they enhanced immersion in the game by requiring you to actually wave your hands in front of the screen, rather than just sitting in a chair. This area was primarily fueled by the release of the Nintendo Wii with its Wiimote in 2005, as well as the PlayStation Move and Microsoft Kinect in 2010. These controllers were successful and showed that non-button video game controls can also be convenient. Well, except for the Kinect. This one wasn't that successful. I needed all this to make a starting point. VR existed only as a version of a conventional monitor, but at the same time, human motion control was emerging. In the meantime, the hype around 3D cinema began, which was also about immersion. All of this slowly but steadily started to bring back the interest in virtual reality, which became apparent with the introduction of new devices like the Vuzix Wrap VR 1200. It was still a device with 2 displays for each eye, and its only peculiarity was its size. The goggles are said to have weighed just 840 grams. Otherwise, 2 decent displays, head position tracking, quite a stylish look, but most importantly, one hell of a price. $600 for such a trinket back in 2011 wasn't exactly affordable. It's hard to tell how far this emerging interest would have lasted had it not been for Palmer Luckey, who arrived on stage. Back then, he was just an enthusiast who was really into video games and virtual reality. Luckey described himself as a self-taught engineer, hacker, creator, and a big fan of electronic devices. Like any great startup, Oculus was born in a garage. Luckey was dissatisfied with the existing VR monitors, let's call them that, because of their graphics, signal lag, and poor field of view. The dissatisfaction prompted him to start working on his own headset in his father's garage. The first prototype of what would later blow up the whole market appeared back in 2011 and was called CR1. Over the next 10 months, this prototype acquired various features like wireless connection, wider field of view, smaller size, and, of course, 3D support. By the way, the project wasn't even intended to be commercial. Luckey shared his progress and ideas with the members of a forum called Meant to Be Seen. As his last name suggests, Palmer turned out to be quite lucky, as the forum was frequently visited by none other than John Carmack. Yes, the one from id Software. Carmack needed to finish the work on Sony's head-mounted display, which was really user-friendly, to which Luckey showed what he had at the moment. The developer was so impressed that he took the prototype with him to E3 2012. The presentation of Doom 3 re-release, subtitled BFG Edition, was scheduled on the event. Everything went according to plan, the game got shown, and one of the distinguishing features of the re-release was the 3D mode support, which was demonstrated on the latest version of Luckey's prototype called Rift. By the way, the word Rift was supposed to symbolize the rift between the virtual world and the real one, while the headset itself was playing the role of a bridge across this rift. Doom 3 was interesting and all, but the headset drew quite a lot of attention as well, not without some praise from Carmack, of course. In particular, it was noticed by Gaikai's director of distribution, Brandon Erib. He offered to invest in the project, which technically marked the birth of a small and modest company called Oculus Vr in July 2012. Later on, Kamak himself joined the company and then served as its CTO until 2019. That's how much he liked it. A few $100,000 of investment is good, real good, but the venture was clearly intended to be costly. So on August 1st, 2012, a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign was launched. The goal was to raise another $250,000 in funding. 4 months or even days. 4 hours later, the amount was raised. The $1 million milestone was reached about 36 hours from launch, and the funding was stopped at just under $2.5 million. Just a minor underestimation of the hype. On March 30th, 2013, the first customer started receiving Kickstarter sets of the goggles. It was the first developer kit, with a pretty self-explanatory name, DK1. Such a move was needed in order for the VR headset to be gradually integrated into games by the time full sales start. The first Oculus Rift can hardly impress anyone with its specs today. Head tracking only supported left and right turns, the FOV was only 90 degrees vertically and 110 horizontally, while the resolution was 640 by 800 for each eye. That may seem like a lot, but when combined with the magnifying lenses, it produced the so-called screen door effect, where the user sees a grid of pixels. The issues with the nausea and dizziness were much less severe than in the case of the Virtual Boy, but were still there. On the other hand, the headset weighed only 380 grams, which was a real revolution after the bulky helmets from the previous videos. Plus, the price was actually quite nice, just $300 as they say. By the June of the same year, the company had sent out more than 5,000 kits, which completely hyped up the info space about how good and promising Oculus was. So much, in fact, that Mark Zuckerberg himself became interested in the company. I'm sure he doesn't need introducing. He personally visited the company's office, introduced himself, got acquainted with the employees, and 2 months later, in March 2014, the deal was settled. Oculus Vr was acquired by Facebook for a mind-boggling $2 billion in stock and $400 million in real money. Now that's what I call growth. As for Palmer Luckey, whose storyline I have inadvertently dropped, he remained more of the company's founder than the actual CEO. He continued to work in terms of research and recruiting, but back in the days of the Kickstarter company, Luckey came to the conclusion that he was not going to be a good CEO. Which actually deserves respect. It's hard to launch such a successful business and still be able to admit that your capabilities aren't limitless. It's worth noting that despite the fact that Facebook now owned Oculus, just like with Instagram or WhatsApp, at the time it implied more autonomy. So the company continued to develop its product at a measured pace. October 2013 saw the announcement of DK2, an improved version of the developer goggles. The acquisition of the company also didn't prevent it from starting to send out the improved headsets by July 2014. Among the notable features, the device now boasted a gyroscope, an accelerometer, a magnetometer, and most importantly, an external camera that captured the position of infrared LEDs on the headset. All of this was needed for improved head position tracking. The damned screen door effect got rid of, thanks to the higher resolution and the transition to Full HD. The unpleasant symptoms of nausea have also been dealt with, thanks to the increased refresh rate. The price remained the same, while the weight increased to 440 grams. But still, it wasn't much, and taking into account the upgraded hardware, it wasn't that significant at all. People who are fairly familiar with VR gaming might be wondering by now. The upgrade is cool, sure, but where are the crucial things like audio, controllers, full 360 visibility, etc.? The answer to most of these questions is provided by Oculus's third dev kit, which was suddenly better known as Crescent Bay. It was unveiled in September 2014 during the Oculus Connect conference. The new headset finally had built-in headphones, which spared the user from the necessity to put them on over the headset. The 360 head position tracking was also introduced, which allowed the user to look in all directions. The ergonomics were also improved, the resolution was increased, the weight was reduced. Long story short, the progress was even greater than between DK1 and 2. The only tangible disadvantage was the increased, but still not big enough resolution. The developers were dissatisfied with how limited they were by the technology of their time, so preparations for the consumer version continued onward. But developers have already started preparing their games to enter the VR era. So it's high time to talk about Oculus's launch lineup, especially since we're just in the right period in terms of timing. What else to start with other than the eternal classic, Elite Dangerous? It's the famous space trader's life simulator with all the fun like flying, shooting, and exploration. The game itself unfolded in a vast universe modeled closely to our own. At the start, the player had an excuse for a spacecraft, some pocket money, and then the full freedom of action began. Even in previous installments, players were going bonkers about how much there was to do and how much territory there was to cover. Well, here, all of that was multiplied by multiplayer and Oculus support. The integration of Elite Dangerous on the DK1 had already made headlines by the time Oculus managed to send the DK2 to the developers. The improved resolution and positional tracking of the DK2 created what many players called their first virtual reality experience. Which is not that surprising. If I'd seen this in 2014, I'd have freaked out too, and then proceeded to simp for Elite to this day. Which is basically what the majority of the current online is doing. I'm sure that Alien Isolation needs even less introduction. It's a first-person horror that does the worst thing imaginable after you get acquainted with the universe. It locks you in the dark and narrow corridors alone with a hungry alien. DK2 did a great job here, surrounding the player with darkness, steam, sparks, and the feeling that you're about to become dinner. Of course, you can hide, use the environment, and slowly make your way to the next checkpoint. But more often you just sit and think, why did I even decide to play this? As for the alien itself, not only was it terrifying, but also possessed an extraordinary AI. Of course, there were also flaws like the mediocre story and occasional bugs. Apart from that, the game is a treasure for those who love a good scare. Those who have enough on their plate and don't need no aliens should check out Sightline the Chair. It's a demo where you don't have to fight anyone or run away from anything. Just sit back and watch. It's actually a great thing for VR newbies. You don't even need the joystick, just put on the headset and enjoy. The picture was amazing, by the way, especially when fantastic landscapes came on screen, like the show with flying particles. Among other things to binge on was Senza Peso. It was a techno demo, which is called a great VR clip by the majority who've watched it. The player would be sailing on a boat with various beautiful stuff happening around, and an epic song playing in the background. Considering that this thing is rather short, I can advise the lucky owners of VR headsets to try it out right after the video. Honestly, what a shame that such clips are so rarely made. And we're running out of time. But okay, let's have a look at one more game from their launch lineup, shall we? Blaze Rush is an arcade racing game by Targum Games. It's like Micro Machines or Rock'n'Roll Racing, whichever you played as a kid. In the modern version of these wonderful games, there are 3 planets with their own tracks to choose from, different characters with their own cars, bonuses in the form of weapons or boosters, and all that with an upbeat soundtrack in the background. And, well, you could experience all of that in VR. Not in first person though, but seeing the track like they are your own toy cars on the floor was also fun. Okay, now we're good. Oculus hasn't even made it to widespread access, yet has already made a revolution and revived the interest in virtual reality. We'll talk about the Rift's bizarre adventures a little later, but not next time. Along with the Rift, the mobile VR was also on the roll, which is just begging to be covered next time. So subscribe, smash the bell button, and stay tuned!